I'm Alex Chen, and I'll never forget the moment I walked into that packed Austin courtroom, watching my father's confident smirk completely vanish as he realized who was sitting at the plaintiff's table. My mother gasped so loudly that the judge had to call for order, while my sister Emma literally dropped her designer purse, the contents scattering across the marble floor. They thought they'd destroyed me 7 years ago when they threw me out with nothing but a backpack and $23 in my wallet. They believed their golden child would inherit everything while I faded into obscurity, struggling to survive on Austin's streets. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But as I sat there in my tailored suit, flanked by the best legal team money could buy, watching their world crumble in real time, I knew they were about to learn the most expensive lesson of their lives. The family real estate empire they'd built over 30 years, worth nearly $3 million, was about to become mine. Every property, every asset, every penny they'd denied me was finally coming home. You see, when you abandon your own child, when you choose favorites and destroy lives, sometimes the universe has a way of balancing the scales, and my revenge wasn't just sweet, it was absolutely devastating. The whole nightmare began on my 18th birthday, what should have been one of the happiest days of my life. I remember waking up that morning in our sprawling Terrytown home, sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked our manicured backyard, with its infinity pool and perfectly landscaped gardens. My parents, Robert and Linda Chen, had built this empire from scratch, starting with a single rental property when I was just 5 years old, and expanding it into one of Austin's most successful real estate investment firms. I bounded downstairs expecting birthday cake and celebration, maybe even some acknowledgement of my acceptance to the University of Texas Computer Science program, which I'd earned through straight A's and relentless determination. Instead, I found my parents sitting stiffly at the kitchen island, their faces carved from stone, while my younger sister Emma lounged nearby, painting her nails with that satisfied smirk she'd perfected over the years. My father, Robert, was a man who commanded respect in every room he entered. At 52, he had the kind of presence that made multi-million-dollar deals happen with a handshake. His graying temples and expensive suits spoke of success, but his eyes had always been cold when they looked at me. That morning, they were positively arctic. "Sit down, Alex," he said without preamble, not even bothering with a birthday greeting. My mother, Linda, couldn't meet my gaze, fidgeting with her coffee cup like it held the secrets of the universe. She'd been a teacher before marrying my father, supposedly someone who cared about nurturing young minds, but when it came to her own children, she'd always had clear favorites. I settled into the chair across from them, confusion knotting in my stomach. Emma continued painting her nails, occasionally glancing up with barely concealed glee, like she was watching her favorite movie reach its climax. "You're 18 now," my father continued, his voice businesslike and detached. "It's time you learned to stand on your own feet. We've decided that continuing to support you would be doing you a disservice." The words hit me like ice water. "What do you mean, support me?" "I work part-time at the computer repair shop. I've saved money for college. I help around the house. Your sister Emma is 2 years younger, but she's already showing the kind of business acumen this family needs," Robert interrupted, gesturing toward Emma, who beamed like she'd just won an Olympic gold medal. "She understands investment, networking, brand building. She's got over 50,000 followers on her social media platforms, and companies are already reaching out for partnerships." I stared at him in disbelief. Emma's idea of work was posting selfies at expensive restaurants and reviewing makeup products that our parents bought for her. She'd never held a real job, never earned a dollar through actual labor, yet somehow this qualified as business acumen. "I don't understand what this has to do with me," I said, though a terrible suspicion was forming in the pit of my stomach. My mother finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "We think it's best if you move out today, find your own place, make your own way, it'll build character." The room spun around me. "Move out? Today? It's my birthday." I'm starting college in 2 months. I've been planning to live here while I study, just like Emma will when she graduates high school. Emma finally looked up from her nails, her expression dripping with false sympathy. Oh, Alex, you'll be fine. You're so smart and independent. Besides, this house is getting crowded, and I'll need space for my content creation studio. Daddy's converting your room into my professional photography setup. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. They'd already planned this, already made decisions about my life without involving me in any way. My room, where I'd spent countless hours coding, studying, dreaming of my future, was being handed over to Emma's vanity project. You can't be serious, I said, looking between my parents. I'm your son. I've never asked for anything unreasonable. I work hard, I get good grades, I help with the family business when you need me. What have I done to deserve this? Robert's expression didn't soften. This isn't about punishment, Alex, it's about investment. Emma has potential that we believe will benefit the entire family. She understands luxury presentation, networking with the right people. The real estate business is about relationships and image, and she's a natural. And I'm not. The question came out more broken than I intended. You're a computer nerd, Emma said with a careless shrug. That's fine for some people, but it's not our world. Daddy needs someone who can charm clients, host parties, represent the Chen name with style. No offense, but when's the last time you even bought new clothes? I looked down at my simple jeans and t-shirt, suddenly conscious of how different I must look compared to Emma in her designer outfit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. But I'd never cared about those things. I cared about building something meaningful, creating technology that could help people, using my mind to solve problems. Your college fund, Linda said quietly, as if reading my thoughts. We've decided to transfer it to Emma. She's interested in studying business and marketing, and the connections she'll make at UT will be invaluable for our family enterprises. The world tilted on its axis. My college fund, money that had been promised to me since I was 12, money I'd assumed would give me the foundation to build my future, was being handed to my sister like an early Christmas present. That money was for my education, I said, my voice barely controlled. You promised me. We've talked about my plans, my degree in computer science, my ideas for starting a tech company. Plans change, Robert said with finality. Emma's future aligns better with our family's interests. She'll inherit the business someday, so investing in her education makes more financial sense. Emma practically glowed with triumph. Don't worry, Alex. When I'm running everything, maybe I'll hire you to fix our computers or something. The casual cruelty of that comment, delivered with a bright smile, finally broke something inside me. These people, who I'd called family my entire life, saw me as nothing more than disposable help. All those years of trying to earn their approval, of working harder than my sister.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Ever had, of believing that merit and effort mattered, had been completely worthless. So what exactly are you proposing? I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. You have until tonight to pack your belongings and find somewhere else to live, Robert said, checking his expensive watch. We'll give you $500 to help with the transition, but after that you're on your own. $500. In Austin's inflated housing market, that might cover a security deposit on the cheapest apartment I could find, assuming I could even find a landlord willing to rent to an 18-year-old with no credit history and a part-time job. What about my car? I asked, though I already knew the answer. The Honda is registered in your mother's name. Robert replied. Emma needs reliable transportation for her business activities. Emma's business activities. The phrase made me want to laugh, or scream, or both. Taking selfies at coffee shops and unboxing products that our parents bought for her was hardly a business, but apparently it was more valuable than my actual job and academic achievements. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. So let me make sure I understand this correctly. You're kicking me out with no car, no college fund, no support, while giving everything to Emma, who has never worked a day in her life, and whose biggest achievement is getting people to like her photos online. Alex, don't be dramatic, Linda said, finally looking at me directly. This is an opportunity for you to prove yourself, to show us that you can succeed without help. If you really are as capable as you think you are, you'll be fine. The gaslighting was perfect in its execution. They were abandoning me and somehow making it sound like a favor, a character-building exercise designed for my benefit. They were destroying my future while claiming they were helping me grow. Emma stood up, smoothing down her designer dress. I'm going to the mall with Madison and Chloe to celebrate. They're so excited about my new studio space. She grabbed the keys to the Honda from the counter, the car that had been mine in everything but paperwork, and headed for the door. Good luck with everything, Alex. I'm sure you'll figure something out. And just like that, she was gone, off to spend money she hadn't earned while I faced homelessness on my 18th birthday. I climbed the stairs to my room one last time, each step feeling like I was walking to my own execution. The space that had been mine for as long as I could remember suddenly felt foreign, temporary, like I was already a ghost haunting someone else's life. My computer set up, my books, my clothes, all the physical evidence of my existence in this house, would have to fit into whatever I could carry. As I pulled my old backpack from the closet, my hands shaking with rage and shock, I could hear Emma's laughter echoing from downstairs as she talked on the phone, probably sharing the good news with her friends. My parents' voices were a low murmur, already making plans for my room's transformation, discussing paint colors and lighting for Emma's content creation space. I packed methodically, choosing only the most essential items. My laptop, the one I'd bought with my own money from the computer repair shop. A few changes of clothes, my programming books. Some photos, though most of them felt poisoned now, showing family moments that I realized had never been as real as I thought. A small wooden box that held my savings, mostly crumpled bills and coins I'd collected over the years, maybe $300 total. Everything else, all the accumulated possessions of my childhood and adolescence, would stay behind to be thrown away or absorbed into Emma's expanding territory. My bed, where I'd spent countless nights coding until dawn, would probably become part of her ring light setup. My desk, where I'd studied for every test and dreamed of my future, would hold her makeup collection. The hardest part was leaving behind my books. I'd collected programming manuals, science fiction novels, technical guides, all the written knowledge that had shaped my understanding of the world. But I couldn't carry them all, and somehow I doubted they'd find a place in Emma's new studio. By the time evening came, I'd stuffed my entire life into 2 backpacks and a duffel bag. I stood at the top of the stairs, looking down at the house that had never really been my home, listening to my parents discuss investment opportunities with Emma, already planning her future while mine lay in ruins. Robert appeared at the bottom of the stairs, holding an envelope. "Your transition money," he said, extending it toward me without coming any closer. "We expect you to make good use of this opportunity." I descended slowly, taking the envelope without looking at him. $500, the price of my family's love, the cost of 18 years of my life in their house. "Is this really what you want?" I asked one final time, "to throw away your own son for Instagram likes and party photos?" For just a moment, something flickered across his face, maybe regret or recognition of what he was doing, but then his jaw tightened, and his businessman's mask slid back into place. "This is what's best for everyone," he said. "You'll understand someday." Linda appeared behind him, tears in her eyes but no words of protest. She'd made her choice, and it wasn't me. I picked up my bags and walked toward the door, my footsteps echoing in the marble entryway, where I'd taken first steps as a toddler, where I'd posed for school photos, where I'd celebrated birthdays that apparently meant nothing now. "Alex." Emma's voice called from the living room. I turned to see her perched on the expensive sofa, phone in hand, probably streaming the whole thing for her followers. "Don't be a stranger," Maybe we can get coffee sometime, catch up. The casual cruelty was breathtaking. She was destroying my life, and treating it like a minor inconvenience, already thinking about how this drama might generate content for her social media empire. I looked at her for a long moment, memorizing her face, the satisfied smile, the designer clothes that our parents' money had bought, the phone that connected her to thousands of adoring strangers while disconnecting her from any human decency. "Goodbye, Emma," I said quietly. "I hope it's worth it." And then I walked out the door, leaving behind everything I'd ever known, carrying nothing but my determination and a burning desire to prove them wrong. The Austin evening was warm, typical for late spring, but I felt cold to my bones as I stood on the sidewalk outside the house where I'd grown up. Cars drove past, carrying families going about their normal lives, people who hadn't just been discarded by their own blood, and I realized I had absolutely nowhere to go. My part-time job at the computer repair shop paid barely enough for food and gas money. I had no credit, no references, no cosigner for an apartment lease. The $500 in my pocket might last a few weeks if I was extremely careful, but then what? I started walking, dragging my bags behind me, heading toward the bus stop that would take me into central Austin. Maybe I could find a cheap motel, somewhere to spend the night while I figured out my next move. The weight of my possessions grew heavier with each step, but not as heavy as the weight of understanding that I was completely alone in the world. Behind me, the lights in my former home glowed warmly, and I could hear music starting up, probably Emma celebrating her victory with her friends. My parents were inside, probably already measuring my room for renovation, planning the bright future they'd stolen from me to give to their favored child. But as I waited for the bus, something began to crystallize in my chest. Not just anger, though that was certainly there, burning like acid in my veins. Something harder, more focused, more dangerous. They thought they'd destroyed me. They believed that without their support, their money, their connections, I would simply fade away into the background of Austin's struggling masses. They assumed that Emma, with her inherited privileges and social media following, was the future of the Chen family. They were about to learn just how wrong they could be. The first night on Austin's streets taught me more about survival than 18 years in my parents' mansion ever could. I ended up at a rundown motel on East Riverside, the kind of place where you pay by the week and don't ask too many questions about your neighbors. The desk clerk, a weathered woman with kind eyes, took pity on me when she saw my situation and gave me a room for $40 instead of the posted $60. That small act of kindness from a stranger hit harder than my family's cruelty, and I spent my first night of freedom crying into a pillow that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. But tears don't pay rent, and self-pity doesn't put food on the table. By morning, I'd made a decision that would define the next 7 years of my life. I wasn't going to just survive what my family had done to me. I was going to thrive in spite of it, and someday, somehow I was going to make them pay for every moment of humiliation they'd put me through. My first priority was expanding my income beyond the part-time computer repair job. I started hitting every tech business in Austin, offering to do freelance work for pennies on the dollar compared to established consultants. Most places turned me away, but a small startup called TechFlow Solutions was desperate enough to give an 18-year-old a chance. They needed someone to update their customer database system, a tedious job that more experienced developers wouldn't touch for the money they were offering. I spent 3 days straight in their cramped office, surviving on vending machine snacks and coffee, rebuilding their entire system from scratch. When the owner, a stressed-out entrepreneur named Marcus Thompson, saw what I'd accomplished, his jaw nearly hit the floor. I hadn't just updated their database. I'd created an automated system that would save them 20 hours of work per week and reduce their error rate to nearly zero. Marcus pulled me aside after I demonstrated the new system. He was in his 40s, African American, with the tired eyes of someone who'd been fighting uphill battles his entire career. But there was something in his expression that I hadn't seen from many people, genuine respect for my abilities rather than dismissal because of my age. Kid, he said, I've been in tech for 15 years, and I've never seen someone your age produce work like this. Where did you learn to code like that? I told him the truth about teaching myself, about spending countless nights learning programming languages, while my sister was out partying with friends our parents' money had bought her. I mentioned that I was currently living in a motel and looking for more work, though I kept the details of my family situation vague. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, then made an offer that changed everything. I can't afford to hire you full-time, but I've got projects backing up faster than I can handle them. You want to work as an independent contractor? Set your own hours, work from wherever you want, and I'll pay you $25 an hour for quality work. $25 an hour was more money than I'd ever made in my life. At the computer repair shop, I was earning minimum wage, barely enough to survive even when living at home. This opportunity could actually allow me to build something resembling a real life. I threw myself into Marcus's projects with desperate intensity. While other 18-year-olds were starting college or partying through their newfound freedom, I was holed up in my motel room, learning advanced programming concepts and tackling increasingly complex challenges. Marcus kept feeding me more work, and word started spreading through Austin's tight-knit tech community about the young freelancer who could solve problems that stumped more experienced developers. Within 3 months, I'd saved enough money to move out of the motel and into a tiny studio apartment in South Austin. It wasn't much, barely 400 square feet with a kitchenette and a bathroom, so small you could touch both walls while sitting on the toilet, but it was mine. Nobody could kick me out on a whim, or hand it over to their favorite child. The sense of security that came with my own space, paid for with my own work, was intoxicating. My social life was non-existent, but I didn't care. Every weekend when other people my age were out at parties or dating, I was either working on client projects or developing my own ideas. I'd started sketching out concepts for a financial planning application, something that could help people like me who'd been thrown into the world with no guidance or safety net. The idea consumed me during every spare moment, and I filled notebook after notebook with features, user interfaces, and business models. The hardest part wasn't the work or the isolation, it was the constant reminders of what I'd lost. Austin is a big city, but the wealthy social circles my family moved in were surprisingly small. I'd catch glimpses of Emma at restaurants I couldn't afford, surrounded by friends wearing clothes that cost more than my monthly rent. She'd gained even more social media followers, and her posts showed a life of endless luxury funded by our parents' real estate empire. Designer shopping sprees, exotic vacations, expensive dinners at Austin's trendiest spots, all while I was eating ramen noodles and calculating whether I could afford to run the air conditioning. The worst encounter happened about 6 months after they'd kicked me out. I was grabbing coffee at a place downtown, one of my few small luxuries, when Emma walked in with 2 friends I recognized from her Instagram posts. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than I made in a month, carrying a purse that could have covered my rent, talking loudly about some business opportunity she was exploring. She spotted me immediately, and I saw a flicker of something cross her face. Not guilt or regret, but irritation, like my presence was spoiling her perfect day. She whispered something to her friends, who glanced over at me with barely concealed amusement, then approached my table with that same fake smile she'd worn the day she destroyed my life. "Alex," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "How are you doing? You look so thin. Are you eating enough?" Her friends giggled behind her, clearly enjoying the spectacle of my obvious poverty compared to Emma's designer lifestyle. I was wearing clothes I'd bought at Goodwill, carrying a laptop bag that was falling apart at the seams, probably looking exactly like what I was, a kid barely scraping by while trying to build something from nothing. "I'm doing fine, Emma," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "How's the real estate business treating you?" She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, I'm not really involved in that boring stuff. I'm focusing on my brand right now." I just signed a partnership deal with a luxury cosmetics company, and I'm launching my own line of lifestyle products. Daddy thinks I could make more money than the real estate business within a few years. Of course she could. When you start with unlimited funding, family connections, and no financial pressure whatsoever, launching a business is just an expensive hobby. I thought about the nights I'd stayed awake until dawn, debugging code for clients, calculating every expense down to the penny, wondering if I'd have enough money to keep my internet connection active so I could keep working. That's great, I said, finishing my coffee and standing up. I'm sure you'll be very successful. As I walked toward the door, I heard one of her friends ask loudly enough for me to hear, "Is that really your brother? He looks like he's homeless or something." Emma's laughter followed me out onto the street, and I spent the rest of the day furious at myself for letting her see how much her success bothered me. But that encounter also crystallized something important for me. I realized that I was still thinking like a victim, still measuring my progress against Emma's inherited advantages. She would always have more money, better clothes, easier opportunities, because she'd been handed everything while I'd been given nothing. Competing with her on her terms was a losing game. Instead, I needed to play a different game entirely, one where my skills and determination mattered more than family connections and social media followers. I started focusing exclusively on building something that couldn't be bought or inherited, expertise that would make me indispensable in Austin's growing tech scene. I began attending every networking event, startup meetup, and technology conference I could afford. Most of the time, I was the youngest person in the room by a decade, but I made sure I was also the most prepared. I'd research every speaker, every company represented, every potential opportunity, then approach conversations with solutions to problems I'd identified through careful observation. Marcus Thompson became not just a client but a mentor, introducing me to other entrepreneurs and vouching for my abilities when age and inexperience might have otherwise disqualified me. He told me later that he'd grown up poor in East Austin, working his way through college while supporting his family, and he recognized something familiar in my desperate hunger to succeed. "You've got that same fire I had when I was your age," he said during one of our coffee meetings. "The difference is, you're smarter than I was at 18, and you're living in a city that's about to explode with tech opportunities. If you play this right, you could build something really significant." His confidence in me felt like oxygen after years of suffocation. For the first time since leaving my family's house, someone believed I could be more than just a survivor. Someone saw potential in me that went beyond simply not failing. By my 19th birthday, I'd built a reputation as Austin's go-to freelancer for complex database problems and custom software solutions. I was earning more money than many college graduates, enough to move into a better apartment and start saving for bigger goals. But more importantly, I'd begun to understand the real power of technology, its ability to scale solutions and create value that extended far beyond individual effort. The financial planning app I'd been developing in my spare time was becoming more sophisticated with each iteration. I'd started with the basic premise of helping people manage money without expensive financial advisors, but as I learned more about the industry, I realized the potential was much bigger. Most financial planning tools were designed for people who already had significant assets. There was a huge underserved market of young adults, immigrants and low-income families, who needed financial guidance but couldn't afford traditional services. I spent my 20th birthday alone in my apartment, not celebrating but coding, adding features to my app that could help people in situations similar to mine. Budgeting tools for unpredictable income, debt management strategies for people with no family safety net, investment guidance for small amounts of money, emergency fund calculators for people living paycheck to paycheck. Every feature came from my own painful experience of navigating financial independence without guidance or support. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Emma was launching lifestyle products for people who already had everything they needed, I was building something that could genuinely help people improve their lives. While she was focused on selling image and aspiration, I was solving real problems for people who'd been overlooked by traditional financial institutions. As my 21st birthday approached, I made a decision that would define the next phase of my life. I was going to stop working for other people and launch my own company. The financial planning app was ready for beta testing. I'd saved enough money to survive for several months without client work, and Marcus had offered to be my first investor if I could prove the concept had market potential. The night before I officially launched Chen Financial Solutions, I sat on the small balcony of my South Austin apartment, looking out over the city lights and thinking about how far I'd traveled from that devastating 18th birthday. I wasn't the same broken kid who'd been thrown out with a backpack and $23. I'd become someone who could create value from nothing, who could solve problems that affected thousands of people, who could build a future that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or support. I thought about Emma, probably out at some trendy restaurant, posting photos of overpriced food, while her followers praised her amazing life. I thought about my parents, counting their real estate profits while congratulating themselves on their successful daughter and their wise decision to cut loose their disappointing son. They had no idea what was coming. They couldn't imagine that the child they'd discarded was building something that would eventually dwarf everything they'd ever accomplished. They still thought in terms of inheritance and family connections, traditional wealth passed down through generations of privilege. But I was creating something entirely new, something that could scale beyond their comprehension, something that would make their real estate empire look like a lemonade stand. And when the time came for them to realize what they'd thrown away, I would be ready. The launch of Chen Financial Solutions started quietly, almost anticlimactically. I sent the beta version to a small group of Marcus's contacts, posted about it in a few online forums, and waited for feedback. The first week brought maybe a dozen users, mostly other young professionals who were curious about a financial planning tool designed for people without trust funds. But the feedback was extraordinary. People weren't just using the app, they were writing long emails about how it had helped them understand their finances for the first time, how the budgeting tools had revealed spending patterns they'd never noticed, how the investment guidance had given them confidence to start planning for their future despite having very little money to work with. One message came from a 22-year-old server who'd been trying to save money for nursing school. She wrote that my app had helped her realize she could afford to take classes part-time while working, something she'd never thought possible. Another came from a recent immigrant who'd been intimidated by American financial institutions, but found my tools simple enough to understand and culturally neutral enough to trust. These weren't just users, they were people whose lives I was actually improving. For the first time since leaving my family's house, I felt like I was doing something that mattered beyond my own survival and revenge fantasies. Word spread through Austin's service industry, then to college campuses, then to other cities as users shared the app with friends and family. Within 3 months, I had over 1,000 active users. Within 6 months, that number had grown to 10,000. The App Store reviews were overwhelmingly positive, with people praising not just the functionality, but the obvious care that had gone into designing features for people who'd been ignored by traditional financial services. Marcus was ecstatic. He'd invested $50,000 in my company, initially worried that he was taking a huge risk on an unproven 21-year-old. But now he was talking about introducing me to venture capital firms and scaling up operations. The app was generating revenue through premium features and partnerships with ethical financial institutions, enough to cover my living expenses and reinvest in development. But success brought new challenges I hadn't anticipated. Managing a growing user base required customer service, something I'd never had to think about as a freelancer. Adding new features meant coordinating with designers and other developers, skills I'd never developed working alone in my apartment. Most importantly, scaling the business required raising significant capital, which meant presenting my company to investors who would scrutinize every aspect of my background and experience. That's when my lack of traditional credentials became a real problem for the first time. I had no college degree, no prestigious internships, no family connections in the business world. On paper, I looked like exactly what I was, a kid who'd taught himself to code and built something impressive through sheer determination and necessity. Some investors dismissed me immediately. Others were intrigued by the app's success, but skeptical about my ability to lead a company beyond the early stages. Several suggested I step aside and let them bring in a more experienced CEO, keeping me on as a technical founder with a reduced stake in the business I'd created from nothing. The temptation to accept those offers was enormous. They were talking about valuations in the millions of dollars, amounts of money that would have solved every financial problem I'd ever had and given me security beyond my wildest dreams. But something held me back, some stubborn refusal to let other people take control of my creation just because they had credentials I lacked. Marcus helped me understand what I was really facing. Over dinner at a restaurant I still couldn't quite afford, he laid out the brutal truth about venture capital and startup culture. "They're not wrong about your experience," he said gently. "Building a product and running a company are completely different skill sets, and you're going to have to learn fast if you want to stay in control. But here's what they're missing: you understand your users better than any MBA they could hire. You built this app because you lived the problems it solves. That's not something you can learn in business school." He introduced me to other founders who'd faced similar challenges, people who'd built successful companies without traditional backgrounds. Some had been forced to give up control and later regretted it. Others had fought to maintain leadership and learned on the job. The ones who'd succeeded all had one thing in common: they'd been willing to admit what they didn't know and work twice as hard as anyone else to learn it. I decided to bet on myself one more time. Instead of accepting investor offers that would sideline me, I focused on finding partners who believed in my vision and my ability to grow into the role. It took months of meetings, pitch presentations, and careful negotiation, but eventually I found a firm that was willing to invest in both the company and my leadership potential. The day I signed that investment deal, sitting in a conference room overlooking downtown Austin, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before my family abandoned me: genuine pride in my accomplishments. Not just relief at surviving or satisfaction at proving people wrong, but actual pride in creating something valuable that was improving people's lives. The investment gave me enough capital to hire real employees, rent proper office space, and accelerate development of new features. But more than that, it validated that my instincts about the market had been correct. Financial planning tools for underserved populations weren't just a niche market, they were the foundation of a business that could eventually help millions of people build better financial futures. As I walked out of that conference room with a check for $2 million in my pocket, I thought about the family that had thrown me away for not fitting their narrow definition of success. They still had no idea what I was building, no concept of the company that was growing in their own city, while they focused on Emma's lifestyle brand and social media partnerships. But that was about to change. My success was becoming too visible to ignore, and Austin's business community was small enough that word would eventually reach them. When it did, I wanted to be ready for whatever came next. The first sign that my family had noticed my success came in the most unexpected way possible. I was sitting in my new office space in East Austin, a converted warehouse that housed about a dozen tech startups, when my phone buzzed with a notification I never thought I'd see. Emma had followed my company's Instagram account and liked our latest post about reaching 50,000 active users. Emma, who had blocked my personal social media accounts 3 years earlier, who had made it clear that acknowledging my existence was beneath her, was suddenly interested in Chen Financial Solutions. The irony of her using the Chen name to promote her lifestyle brand while simultaneously trying to distance herself from her Chen brother wasn't lost on me, but seeing her engagement with my company's content felt like a small victory. What I didn't realize was that Emma's sudden interest wasn't coincidental. Through my network of contacts in Austin's business community, word had begun spreading about the young entrepreneur behind one of the city's fastest-growing fintech startups. My story was compelling to local media, a 22-year-old college dropout who'd built a multi-million-dollar company from his South Austin apartment, focused on helping underserved communities manage their finances. The first major profile appeared in Austin Business Journal, complete with photos of me in my office and quotes about my vision for democratizing financial planning. The reporter had done her research, mentioning that I'd been self-taught and had started the company with minimal capital, though I'd kept the specific details of my family's situation vague. I talked about understanding financial insecurity firsthand and wanting to create tools for people who'd been overlooked by traditional institutions. What I hadn't expected was how quickly that article would spread through Austin's interconnected social and business networks. Within hours of publication, I started receiving congratulatory messages from people I'd never met, business development inquiries from companies wanting to partner with us, and interview requests from other media outlets interested in the local startup success story. Marcus called me that afternoon, barely containing his excitement. "Alex, have you seen the response to this article? I've gotten 5 calls already from people asking about you and the company. This kind of exposure is worth millions in advertising." He was right. Our user acquisition rate doubled in the week following the article's publication, and we started getting inquiries from potential investors who hadn't returned our calls just months earlier. The validation felt incredible, but it also made me nervous. Success meant visibility, and visibility meant it was only a matter of time before my family learned exactly what I'd been building, while they assumed I was struggling in obscurity. The breakthrough moment came at South by Southwest, Austin's massive annual festival that brings together technology, music, and interactive media from around the world. I'd been invited to speak on a panel about financial technology for underserved markets, something that would have been unthinkable just 2 years earlier, when I was coding alone in my apartment. The panel was scheduled for a prime time slot, and the auditorium was packed with investors, entrepreneurs, and media representatives from around the country. I was nervous as I walked onto the stage, but once I started talking about the problems my app was solving, the passion that had driven me for the past 4 years took over. I explained how traditional financial planning had failed entire generations of Americans, how people working multiple jobs or living paycheck to paycheck had been ignored by institutions that focused only on clients with significant assets. I demonstrated features of our app that helped users build emergency funds with spare change, plan for education costs without family support, and navigate financial decisions without expensive advisors. The audience response was electric. During the question and answer session, people shared their own stories of financial struggle and praised the app for addressing real problems they'd experienced. Several attendees approached me afterward, including representatives from major financial institutions who wanted to discuss partnership opportunities. But the most significant moment came when I spotted Tyler Brooks in the audience, Emma's boyfriend, holding up his phone and clearly recording my presentation. Tyler was a wannabe influencer himself, someone who'd attached himself to Emma's success and spent his days creating content about their luxury lifestyle. Seeing him at my panel meant Emma knew exactly where I was and what I was doing. After the panel ended, Tyler approached me with that same fake smile I remembered from Emma's social media posts. He was tall, generically handsome in the way that photograph well, wearing expensive clothes that screamed trying too hard rather than actual success. "Alex," he said, extending his hand like we were old friends. "That was an incredible presentation. Emma never told me her brother was such a successful entrepreneur." The casual lie was breathtaking. Emma had told him plenty about me, but certainly not about my success. More likely, she'd described me as the family failure, the brother who couldn't handle being cut off, and had disappeared into Austin's struggling masses. Thank you, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. How is Emma doing? Still focusing on her brand, Tyler's smile faltered slightly. Oh, she's doing amazing. Her follower count just hit 200,000, and she's got several major brand partnerships lined up, but she's also been exploring some business opportunities, more serious ventures. I bet she was. Emma had always been quick to spot trends and opportunities, and seeing her previously dismissed brother featured in business publications as the CEO of a rapidly growing company would definitely qualify as a serious development worth exploring. That's great to hear, I said, already planning my exit from this conversation. Please give her my regards. As I walked away, I could hear Tyler on his phone, presumably reporting back to Emma about our encounter. I knew this meant the family dynamics I'd been avoiding for 4 years were about to become much more complicated. The aftermath of SXSW exceeded every expectation I'd had for the company's growth trajectory. We received inquiries from venture capital firms in Silicon Valley, partnership offers from major banks, and acquisition interest from established fintech companies. The validation was intoxicating, but it also meant making decisions that would determine whether Chen Financial Solutions remained an independent company or became part of someone else's empire. Maya Rodriguez, who had joined the company as our head of marketing 6 months earlier, became invaluable during this period. She was a few years older than me, a University of Texas Business School graduate, who'd taken a significant pay cut to work for a startup because she believed in our mission. Unlike many of the people I'd encountered in Austin's business scene, Maya came from a working-class family and understood our users' financial challenges from personal experience. Alex, you need to be really careful about these acquisition offers, she warned during one of our strategy meetings. They're all talking about maintaining your vision and keeping the team intact, but I've seen what happens when big companies buy startups. They gut the original mission and turn them into products that serve their existing customer base. She was right, but the numbers being discussed were staggering. One offer valued the company at $50 million, an amount that would make me wealthy beyond anything I'd ever imagined. After years of financial insecurity and uncertainty, the temptation to accept that kind of security was overwhelming. Marcus helped me think through the decision during a long dinner conversation at one of Austin's most expensive restaurants, a place I could finally afford but still felt strange dining in. The question isn't whether you need the money, he said. The question is whether you've accomplished what you set out to do. I realized I hadn't. Yes, we were helping thousands of people manage their finances better, but we were still only reaching a fraction of the market that needed these tools. Selling to a large corporation might provide short-term financial security, but it would also mean giving up control over the company's direction and mission. I decided to decline the acquisition offers and instead focus on raising venture capital that would allow us to scale independently. It was a riskier path, but it meant maintaining control over our vision and continuing to prioritize users over profits. The Series A funding round was unlike anything I'd experienced before. Presentations to partners at prestigious venture capital firms, due diligence processes that examined every aspect of our business model, and negotiations over terms that would determine the company's future trajectory. Some meetings went brilliantly, with partners praising our user engagement and market opportunity. Others were disasters, with investors questioning everything from our revenue projections to my leadership experience. The most challenging meeting was with Davidson Ventures, a firm known for backing successful fintech companies. The managing partner, William Davidson, was in his 60s, with the kind of old money confidence that came from generations of inherited wealth. He reminded me uncomfortably of my father, though he was more polished in his dismissal of my background. Your product has impressive metrics, he admitted, reviewing our user data, but I have concerns about the management team's ability to scale this business to its full potential. Have you considered bringing in a more experienced IKEA while you focus on the technical aspects? It was the same suggestion I'd been hearing for months, always phrased diplomatically, but carrying the clear implication that someone like me couldn't be trusted to lead a serious business. I'd prepared for this question, but it still stung every time I heard it. Mr. Davidson, I appreciate your concern, I replied, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. But I think there's value in having leadership that truly understands our users' experiences. I've lived the financial challenges our app addresses. That perspective isn't something you can hire from a business school. Davidson's expression suggested he wasn't convinced, but he didn't push the point. The meeting ended cordially, but without any clear indication of their interest level. Fortunately, other firms were more receptive to our vision and my leadership. After 3 months of presentations and negotiations, we secured $15 million in Series A funding from a consortium led by Riverside Capital, a firm with a strong track record in consumer technology and a partnership approach that aligned with our values. The funding announcement generated another wave of media attention, including a feature story in TechCrunch that positioned Chen Financial Solutions as one of the most promising fintech startups in the country. The article included quotes from our investors praising both the company's growth potential and my leadership, validation that felt even better than the financial investment. But the real impact of that coverage became clear when Maya burst into my office the following Monday morning, laptop in hand and barely containing her laughter. "Alex, you need to see this," she said, pulling up Emma's Instagram account. "Your sister has been very busy this weekend." Emma had posted a series of stories and posts about being so proud of family success and inspiration coming from unexpected places. She'd shared the TechCrunch article with commentary about how entrepreneurship runs in the Chen family and how she'd always known her brother had potential. The revisionist history was breathtaking in its audacity, but the posts that really caught my attention were the ones where Emma started positioning herself as a business advisor and mentor. She'd created content about recognizing opportunity and supporting family ventures, complete with photos of her in professional settings that looked suspiciously staged. She was clearly trying to associate herself with my success while maintaining her existing lifestyle brand. "She's getting dragged in the comments," Maya pointed out, scrolling through responses from Emma's followers. "A lot of people are asking why she never mentioned having a successful entrepreneur brother before, and some are calling her out for suddenly claiming credit." I had mixed feelings about Emma's social media strategy. Part of me was annoyed at her attempt to capitalize on my success, after years of treating me like I didn't exist. But another part was amused at how transparent her opportunism was to anyone paying attention. What concerned me more was what Emma's public acknowledgement of my success meant for the broader family dynamic. If she was posting about me on social media, it meant my parents definitely knew about Chen Financial Solutions and the media coverage we'd been receiving. The question was what they planned to do about it. I didn't have to wait long for an answer. The call came on a Thursday afternoon while I was in meetings with our engineering team about new features for the app. My assistant knocked on the conference room door, something she'd been instructed never to do unless it was truly urgent. "Alex, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you have a call from someone claiming to be your father. He says it's important family business." The conference room went quiet. My team knew the basics of my background, that I'd started the company very young and without family support, but I'd never shared the specific details of what had happened when I turned 18. I excused myself and took the call in my private office, my hands surprisingly steady as I picked up the phone. Robert Chen's voice was exactly as I remembered it, authoritative and controlled, but there was something different underneath, a note of uncertainty I'd never heard before. "Alex," he said, and there was a pause that stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. "I think it's time we had a conversation." Robert Chen's voice carried the same commanding tone I remembered from childhood, but there was something else beneath it now, something that sounded almost like desperation. I let the silence stretch between us, savoring the moment when the man who had thrown me out with nothing was calling to ask for a conversation. "Hello, Robert," I said finally, deliberately using his first name instead of calling him Dad. The small act of defiance felt surprisingly satisfying. "What can I do for you?" Another pause. "I think we should meet in person. There are things we need to discuss about the family, about your success, about opportunities for collaboration." Collaboration. The word tasted bitter even hearing it secondhand. This was the same man who had told me I was worthless, who had given my college fund to Emma, who had literally kicked me out of his house for not fitting his narrow definition of potential. Now that I'd built something valuable without him, suddenly he wanted to collaborate. "I'm pretty busy these days," I replied, enjoying the power dynamic more than I probably should have. "My schedule is fairly packed with actual business meetings. What specifically did you want to discuss?" The frustration in his voice was barely concealed. "Alex, you're still my son, despite our past disagreements. Your mother and I have been following your company's progress, and we're proud of what you've accomplished. We think there might be synergies between your technology platform and our real estate investments." Past disagreements. He was reframing years of emotional abuse and abandonment as a simple disagreement, like we'd argued over where to go for dinner instead of him destroying my life on my 18th birthday. The audacity was breathtaking, but it also told me everything I needed to know about his mindset. He still didn't understand what he'd done wrong, which meant he was likely to make the same mistakes again. "I'll have my assistant check my calendar and get back to you," I said, already planning how I wanted to handle this reunion. "It might be a few weeks before I have an opening." I could hear his sharp intake of breath. Robert Chen was not accustomed to being told to wait, especially not by his own son. But he swallowed his pride and agreed to wait for my call, which told me just how desperately he wanted whatever he thought I could provide. After hanging up, I sat in my office staring out at the Austin skyline, processing the conversation and what it meant for the careful life I'd built. For 4 years I'd operated under the assumption that my family was a closed chapter, that I'd moved beyond their influence and judgment. But Robert's call had stirred up emotions I thought I'd buried, anger and hurt that I'd channeled into building the company, but never actually resolved. Maya knocked on my door an hour later, concern evident on her face. "Your assistant said your father called. Are you okay?" I'd confided in Maya about my family's situation months earlier, during a late-night conversation about childhood experiences that had shaped our approach to the business. She'd grown up in a loving but financially struggling family and had trouble understanding how parents could abandon their own child, but she'd become fiercely protective of both me and the company we'd built together. "He wants to meet," I said, still trying to process my own feelings about the conversation. "Apparently they're proud of my success and want to explore collaboration opportunities." Maya's expression darkened. "Collaboration opportunities? Alex, these are the same people who threw you out with nothing. What could they possibly offer you now that you couldn't do better independently?" She was right, of course. My company was worth exponentially more than my parents' real estate portfolio, and I had access to capital connections and opportunities they could never have imagined when they dismissed me as worthless. But there was something appealing about the idea of facing them from a position of strength, of showing them exactly what they'd thrown away when they'd chosen Emma over me. I spent the next week researching my family's current situation, using the same investigative skills I'd developed for competitive analysis in the business world. What I discovered was fascinating and somewhat satisfying. Emma's lifestyle brand had plateaued significantly over the past year, with follower growth stagnating and brand partnerships becoming less lucrative as the influencer market became oversaturated. Her attempts to launch physical products had been largely unsuccessful, generating negative reviews and customer complaints that were starting to damage her online reputation. More interesting was the information I found about my parents' real estate business.
They'd expanded aggressively during Austin's housing boom, leveraging their existing properties to purchase additional investments throughout the city. But recent changes in interest rates and local housing policies had squeezed their profit margins significantly. Several of their newer properties were showing negative cash flow, and they'd been forced to sell some assets to maintain liquidity. They weren't in financial crisis, but they were definitely facing pressure they hadn't experienced in years. Robert's sudden interest in collaboration was starting to make more sense. He needed access to new revenue streams and investment opportunities, and my fintech company represented exactly the kind of modern scalable business model that his traditional real estate approach couldn't match. I decided to take the meeting, but on my terms and in my space. I had my assistant schedule it from my downtown office, in the conference room where I'd been making multi-million-dollar deals with investors and partners. I wanted them to see the company I'd built, to understand the level of success I'd achieved without their help or approval. The day of the meeting, I arrived early and spent time arranging the space to maximum effect. Awards and recognition plaques prominently displayed, recent media coverage framed on the walls, financial projections and user growth charts visible on the conference room screens. I wanted every detail to communicate that I was no longer the 18-year-old they'd thrown away, but the CEO of a company that was rapidly becoming a major player in the financial technology space. Robert and Linda arrived precisely on time, accompanied by Emma and Tyler, though I hadn't invited the latter too. Seeing them walk into my office was surreal, like characters from a previous life suddenly appearing in my current reality. Robert looked older than I remembered, stress lines around his eyes and gray threading through his carefully styled hair. Linda seemed smaller somehow, less confident than the woman who had once dismissed my pain so casually. Emma, however, looked exactly like her social media presence suggested. Designer clothes, perfect makeup, an aura of curated sophistication that was probably very effective on Instagram but felt artificial in person. Tyler lurked behind her like a nervous accessory, clearly out of his depth in an actual business environment. Alex, Robert said, extending his hand with the same confident smile I remembered from childhood. Thank you for making time for us. This office is impressive, really.
Impressive. I shook his hand briefly, then gestured for them to sit around the conference table. The power dynamic was immediately clear. This was my space, my meeting, my rules. For the first time in my life, I held all the cards in an interaction with my family. I have about 30 minutes before my next call with investors, I said, deliberately emphasizing that I had more important things to do than reminisce with them. What did you want to discuss? Robert launched into a prepared presentation about synergies between technology and real estate, about opportunities for cross-promotion and shared customer bases. He talked about my app's user demographics and how they might align with potential real estate customers, about leveraging my platform to offer property investment tools, about combining our brands for mutual benefit. It was clear he'd done his homework about my company, but it was equally clear he didn't understand what made it successful. He was thinking in terms of traditional business partnerships, cross-selling opportunities, and revenue-sharing arrangements. He completely missed the mission-driven aspect of what I'd built, the focus on helping underserved communities rather than extracting maximum profit from existing customers. Emma jumped in when Robert paused, her voice bright with the kind of enthusiasm she usually reserved for unboxing videos. And I could help with the marketing and social media strategy. I have over 200,000 followers who trust my recommendations about lifestyle products and services. We could create content that showcases how successful families manage money, make it aspirational but accessible. The tone-deaf nature of her suggestion was astounding. She wanted to use my platform, which I'd specifically designed for people struggling financially, as a vehicle for promoting aspirational lifestyle content. She was essentially proposing to turn my life's work into another extension of her personal brand. That's an interesting perspective, I said carefully, but I'm not sure you understand our target market. Our users are people working multiple jobs to pay rent, young adults with student loan debt, families trying to build emergency funds from spare change. I'm not sure aspirational lifestyle content aligns with their needs or interests. Emma's smile faltered slightly, but she pressed on. Well, maybe we could expand the target market. There are lots of successful people who need financial planning tools too. We could create premium features, exclusive content, maybe even in-person events for high-value users. She was describing a completely different business model, one that would fundamentally change the company's mission from serving underserved communities to catering to affluent customers. It was exactly the kind of feature creep that had destroyed other mission-driven startups when they prioritized revenue over impact. Tyler, who had been silent until now, apparently felt the need to contribute something to the conversation. I could help with video content and influencer partnerships. I know lots of finance and business creators who might want to collaborate. I looked at him for a long moment, this person whose primary qualification was dating my sister and whose biggest achievement was being featured in other people's social media posts. The idea that he thought he could contribute meaningfully to a serious fintech company was almost endearing in its delusion. Let me ask you something, I said, directing my attention back to Robert. Why now? Why are you interested in working with me now, when you haven't spoken to me in 4 years? Robert shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly not expecting such a direct question. Alex, I know we've had our differences, but family is family. We're proud of what you've built, and we want to be part of your success. The careful phrasing was revealing. They didn't want to help me succeed, they wanted to be part of success I'd already achieved. They were looking for a way to attach themselves to my accomplishments without acknowledging the damage they'd done or taking responsibility for years of abandonment and dismissal. When you say family is family, I replied, are you referring to the same family that threw me out on my 18th birthday? The same family that gave my college fund to Emma? The same family that told me I brought shame on the Chen name? The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Linda looked down at her hands, unable to meet my gaze. Emma's expression shifted from bright enthusiasm to something closer to panic as she realized this wasn't going to be the happy reunion she'd apparently envisioned. Robert, to his credit, maintained eye contact, though I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Alex, we made some difficult decisions based on the information we had at the time. We thought tough love would motivate you to reach your potential. And look how well it worked out. The breathtaking arrogance of that statement hung in the air like smoke. He was actually trying to take credit for my success, claiming that abandoning me had been a deliberate strategy to help me grow. It was gaslighting on a level that would have been impressive if it weren't so personally devastating. So you're saying that kicking me out with $23 and no support was actually a gift? That giving my inheritance to Emma was really an investment in my character development? My voice remained level, but I could feel anger building in my chest like a physical force. Alex, you're being dramatic, Emma interjected, her voice taking on the condescending tone I remembered from childhood. Daddy and Mom always believed in you. They just knew you were strong enough to make it on your own, while I needed more guidance and support. The revisionist history was so complete, so shameless, that I almost had to admire it. In Emma's version of events, my abandonment had been a compliment to my strength, while her pampered lifestyle had been necessary assistance for her weakness. She'd managed to reframe every advantage she'd received as a burden and every hardship I'd endured as a privilege. Is that really how you remember it? I asked her directly. Because I remember you telling me I was worthless, that I brought shame on the family, that you were glad to see me gone. Emma's face flushed slightly, but her voice remained steady. We were teenagers, Alex. People say things they don't mean when they're emotional. I've grown a lot since then, and I hope you have too. The casual dismissal of years of cruelty as teenage drama was the final straw for me. These people had learned nothing from what they'd done. They felt no genuine remorse for the damage they'd caused. They were here purely because they wanted access to my success, not because they'd recognized their mistakes or wanted to make amends. I stood up from the conference table, signaling that the meeting was over. I appreciate you taking the time to come here and share your thoughts, I said in my most professional voice. I'll have my team review your proposals and get back to you if we see any opportunities for collaboration. Robert's face darkened as he realized he was being dismissed. Alex, I don't think you understand the opportunity here. Combined, our businesses could dominate the Austin market. This is bigger than any personal issues we might have had in the past. You're right, I replied, walking toward the conference room door. I don't understand the opportunity. I've built a company worth $50 million that helps hundreds of thousands of people improve their financial lives. What exactly do you bring to that equation besides a desire to profit from my work? The question hung in the air as they filed out of my office, their planned reconciliation having collapsed under the weight of their own selfishness and lack of self-awareness. Emma lingered at the door, clearly wanting to say something more, but Tyler pulled her away before she could find the words. After they left, I sat alone in my conference room processing what had just happened. For years I'd fantasized about this moment, about showing my family how successful I'd become despite their abandonment. But the reality had been more hollow than satisfying. They hadn't learned anything from their mistakes, hadn't developed any capacity for genuine reflection or remorse. They were the same people who had valued image over substance, favoritism over fairness, short-term convenience over long-term relationships. Maya found me there an hour later, staring out the window at downtown Austin's growing skyline. How did it go? She asked gently. Exactly as badly as I expected, I replied. They want to use my success to solve their own problems without acknowledging any responsibility for what they put me through. So what's next? She asked. Do you think they'll leave you alone now? I considered the question carefully. Knowing my family, Robert's pride had been wounded by my dismissal, and Emma's opportunism hadn't been satisfied by my refusal to collaborate. They would likely try other approaches, possibly attempting to leverage public opinion or social media pressure to force me into some kind of relationship. No, I said finally. They're not going away that easily. This was just the opening move. I was right. Over the next 2 weeks, Emma launched a social media campaign that was masterful in its manipulation. She posted a series of stories about family healing and supporting each other through success and failure. She shared childhood photos of us together, adding captions about how proud she was of her brother's achievements and how she hoped we could rebuild our relationship. The post generated significant engagement from her followers, many of whom had been following my company's success through media coverage. Comment sections filled with people praising Emma for being supportive and encouraging us to reconcile. She was using her social media influence to create public pressure for a reunion, making it seem like I was the unreasonable one for not embracing my loving family. More concerning were the business implications. Several potential partners and investors mentioned seeing Emma's posts and asked about my family relationships. The narrative she was creating suggested that I had family support and connections in Austin's business community, which wasn't necessarily negative but also wasn't accurate. The situation escalated when Robert arranged for a feature story in Austin Monthly magazine about successful family businesses in the city. The article prominently featured Chen Real Estate Holdings and mentioned my company as an example of how entrepreneurial success ran in the Chen family. Robert was quoted extensively about his pride in both his daughter's achievements and his hopes for future family collaboration. The article was a masterclass in public relations manipulation. Robert had managed to associate his business with my success without explicitly claiming credit, while positioning himself as a proud father rather than the man who had abandoned his son. He'd created a narrative where we were all part of the same success story, just working in different industries. When reporters called my office asking for comment on the article, I found myself in an impossible position. Denying the family connection would require explaining the full story of my abandonment, which would generate negative publicity for everyone involved. But staying silent allowed Robert's narrative to stand unchallenged, essentially letting him claim credit for my achievements. I decided to respond strategically rather than emotionally. I had my publicist release a statement emphasizing my company's independence and mission-driven focus, while acknowledging that I came from an entrepreneurial family background. It was carefully worded to avoid both confirming and denying Robert's claims while redirecting attention to the work that actually mattered. But the family pressure campaign continued to escalate. Linda started showing up at public events where I was speaking, sitting in the audience with tears in her eyes, playing the role of proud mother separated from her successful son by misunderstandings and stubbornness. Emma increased her social media efforts, posting about family reconciliation and the importance of forgiveness. The breaking point came when I learned that Robert had scheduled a meeting with Marcus Thompson, my mentor and investor, ostensibly to discuss potential real estate investments for Marcus's portfolio. What he actually wanted was to pump Marcus for information about my company's financials, strategic plans, and investment relationships. Marcus called me immediately after the meeting, his voice tight with anger. "Alex, I need to tell you what just happened. Your father just spent an hour trying to get me to share confidential information about your business. He claimed he was considering investing in the company himself and needed details about our financial projections and investor commitments." The betrayal was stunning even by Robert's standards. He was actively trying to gather intelligence about my business, presumably to find ways to insert himself into our operations or to identify vulnerabilities he could exploit. It was corporate espionage disguised as paternal interest. "What did you tell him?" I asked, though I already knew Marcus would never violate his fiduciary responsibilities. I told him that if he was interested in investing, he needed to go through proper channels and submit a formal proposal like any other potential investor. "But Alex, you need to be careful. He knows a lot about your business from the media coverage, and he's clearly looking for ways to leverage that information." That conversation convinced me that my family's campaign wasn't going to stop with public relations manipulation. They were actively working to insert themselves into my business relationships and operations using whatever methods they thought might be effective. I needed to take decisive action to protect both my company and my personal life from their continued interference. I called an emergency meeting with my legal team to discuss options for preventing further family intrusion into business operations. My lawyer David Kim was a specialist in corporate law and intellectual property protection who had helped several Austin startups deal with similar issues. "The good news is that your company's corporate structure provides significant protection against external interference," David explained. "They can't force their way into business operations or demand access to confidential information. The bad news is that you can't prevent them from continuing their public relations campaign or trying to associate themselves with your success." "What about the attempted information gathering?" I asked. Robert essentially tried to conduct corporate espionage through Marcus. David considered this carefully. "That's potentially actionable, especially if he misrepresented his intentions or tried to obtain proprietary information. But pursuing legal action would likely generate exactly the kind of public attention they're hoping for. Sometimes the best response to manipulation is simply refusing to engage." He was right, but I was tired of being reactive to my family's schemes. I wanted to take control of the narrative and establish clear boundaries that would prevent future interference. After discussing various options with David and Maya, I decided on a strategy that would address the situation definitively while protecting my company's reputation. I scheduled a press conference for the following week, ostensibly to announce Chen Financial Solutions' expansion into new markets and our upcoming Series B funding round. But I also planned to address the family situation directly, on my terms and in my own words. The press conference was held in our new headquarters, a sleek office building in downtown Austin that represented everything I'd built from nothing over the past 4 years. Local media, industry publications, and several investors attended, expecting routine business announcements but receiving something much more personal and compelling. I started with the business updates, announcing our expansion into 3 new states and our plans to serve over 1 million users within the next 18 months. I discussed our Series B funding round, which was projected to raise $40 million and value the company at over $200 million. The financial metrics were impressive enough to generate significant coverage on their own. But then I shifted to the personal story that had motivated everything I'd built.
I talked about starting the company as a 21-year-old with no family support, sleeping on friends' couches while coding the first version of our app. I described the financial insecurity that had inspired our focus on underserved communities, the understanding that came from actually living the problems our technology was designed to solve. And then I addressed the family situation directly but diplomatically. I've been fortunate to receive attention recently about my family background and the entrepreneurial spirit that supposedly runs in the Chen family, I said, looking directly into the cameras. I want to be clear that Chen Financial Solutions was built entirely independently without family investment advice or support. Our success belongs to our team, our users, and our investors who believed in our mission when others didn't. The statement was carefully crafted to establish the truth without generating unnecessary drama. I wasn't attacking my family directly, but I was making it clear that their attempts to claim credit for my success were false. I was taking control of the narrative before it could be manipulated further. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Business publications praised my honesty and independence, with several articles specifically mentioning the challenges faced by entrepreneurs without family support systems. Social media response was largely positive, with many people sharing their own stories of building success despite difficult family relationships. More importantly, the press conference effectively ended my family's public relations campaign. Robert couldn't continue claiming credit for my success after I'd publicly stated that he'd provided no support. Emma's social media posts about family reconciliation looked increasingly hollow when contrasted with my clear statements about independence and self-reliance. The final confrontation came 3 weeks later in the form of a lawsuit that nobody saw coming. Robert had filed a claim arguing that the Chen name used in my company's branding was family intellectual property that he had rights to control. He demanded either licensing fees for my use of the family name or a court order forcing me to rebrand the company. The lawsuit was legally frivolous but strategically brilliant. Even if Robert couldn't win, the legal process would be expensive, time-consuming, and potentially damaging to the company's reputation. He was essentially attempting legal extortion using the court system to force me into the collaboration I'd refused to consider voluntarily. David Kim was furious when he reviewed the lawsuit papers. "This is harassment disguised as legitimate legal action," he said, slamming the documents onto his desk. "The Chen name is one of the most common surnames in the world. He has no intellectual property rights to it, and he certainly can't prevent his own son from using his legal name in a business context." But David also warned me that defending against the lawsuit would require significant time and resources, even though we would ultimately win. Robert was counting on the cost and distraction of legal proceedings to pressure me into settling with some kind of business relationship or financial payment. I made a decision that surprised everyone, including my legal team. Instead of just defending against Robert's lawsuit, I filed a countersuit for harassment, defamation, and intentional interference with business relationships. I documented every aspect of his campaign against my company, from the attempted information gathering through Marcus to the false claims of family collaboration in media interviews. More significantly, I used the legal discovery process to demand access to Robert's financial records and business communications. If he wanted to drag our family drama into court, I was going to make sure the full truth came to light, including the financial pressures that were motivating his sudden interest in my success. The discovery process revealed information that was even more damaging than I'd expected. Robert's real estate business was in much worse shape than public records indicated. He'd been using Emma's social media success to secure partnerships and investments, essentially leveraging her follower count as collateral for business loans. When her influencer income started declining, it had created a cascade of financial problems that threatened several of his property investments. More interesting was the communication between Robert and Emma about my company. Email exchanges showed that they'd been planning their reconciliation campaign for months, researching my business relationships and looking for ways to insert themselves into our operations. Emma had even created a detailed social media strategy for associating herself with my success, complete with target posting schedules and engagement metrics. The evidence painted a clear picture of calculated manipulation rather than genuine family concern. They hadn't reached out because they missed me or regretted their past behavior. They'd approached me because they needed access to new revenue streams and investment opportunities, and my company represented their best chance at financial recovery. When this information became part of the court record, the media coverage shifted dramatically. Instead of a story about family reconciliation and entrepreneurial success, it became a cautionary tale about manipulation and exploitation. Robert's reputation in Austin's business community was severely damaged, and Emma lost thousands of social media followers as people realized the artificial nature of her content. The legal case concluded with a complete victory for my side. The judge not only dismissed Robert's trademark claim but ordered him to pay my legal fees and issued a restraining order preventing further harassment or interference with my business operations. Robert was also required to issue public retractions of his false claims about contributing to my company's success. The court battle had been expensive and exhausting, but it had also been liberating. For the first time since leaving my family's house, I was completely free from their influence and manipulation. They could no longer claim credit for my achievements, interfere with my business relationships, or use public pressure to force unwanted contact. Emma's influencer career never recovered from the scandal. Her follower count dropped significantly as people realized how much of her content had been artificial, and brand partnerships dried up as companies distanced themselves from the family drama. She was forced to find actual employment for the first time in her life, taking a junior marketing position with a local company at a fraction of the income she'd been earning through social media. Robert's real estate business survived but never returned to its previous level of success. The legal costs and reputation damage from our court battle made it difficult for him to secure new investments or partnerships. Several of his properties went into foreclosure, and he was forced to sell others at significant losses to maintain liquidity. Linda, who had remained largely silent throughout the entire conflict, eventually reached out with a genuine apology letter acknowledging the damage they'd done and expressing regret for her role in my abandonment. It was the only communication from my family that seemed authentic, though it came too late to repair our relationship. As for me, Chen Financial Solutions continued growing beyond my wildest expectations. We completed our Series B funding round at a valuation of $300 million, expanded our services to serve over 2 million users, and began exploring international markets. The company went public 3 years later, making me one of the youngest billionaires in American history. But the real satisfaction wasn't in the financial success or public recognition. It was in the knowledge that I'd built something meaningful entirely on my own terms, without compromising my values or accepting help from people who had never believed in me. Every user who improved their financial situation through our app, every family who built their first emergency fund, every young adult who learned to manage money without expensive advisors represented the true measure of what I'd accomplished. The Chen family real estate empire that had once seemed so impressive was now worth less than my annual salary. Emma's lifestyle brand that had been chosen over my potential was now a cautionary tale about artificial influence and failed authenticity. Robert's business acumen that had been used to justify my abandonment was now remembered primarily for its spectacular legal defeat and public humiliation. I never spoke to any of them again after the court case concluded. There was nothing left to say, no relationship worth salvaging, no benefit to maintaining contact with people who had proven themselves incapable of genuine love or respect. I'd built a new family through my business relationships, my team, and the mentors who had believed in me when my actual family couldn't be bothered to try. The story became a case study taught in business schools about entrepreneurial resilience and the importance of mission-driven leadership. But for me, it remained a personal reminder that the people who abandon you often do so because they lack the vision to see your true potential. Their judgment says nothing about your worth and everything about their limitations. I kept one photo from my childhood on my office desk, not because I missed my family, but because it reminded me of how far I'd traveled from that broken 18-year-old who'd been thrown out with nothing but determination. Every time I looked at it, I remembered that the most powerful revenge isn't just success, it's building something so meaningful and valuable that the people who doubted you become irrelevant to your story. Chen Financial Solutions now serves over 10 million users worldwide, has created thousands of jobs, and has helped millions of people build better financial futures. We've partnered with universities to provide financial literacy education, funded scholarship programs for students from disadvantaged backgrounds, and created emergency relief funds for families facing financial crises. The company became everything I'd dreamed of when I was coding alone in my tiny apartment, surviving on ramen noodles and determination. Sometimes I wonder what might have happened if my family had supported me from the beginning, if they'd believed in my potential instead of dismissing it. But then I realized that their abandonment was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to develop independence, resilience, and self-reliance that I never would have learned in the comfort of their support. It gave me the perspective necessary to understand the financial struggles our app addresses, and it provided the motivation to build something truly meaningful rather than simply profitable. The Chen name that Robert tried to claim ownership of is now worth billions of dollars, but not because of anything he built. It's valuable because of the company I created from nothing, the lives I've improved, and the problems I've solved. The family legacy he was so concerned about protecting became something far greater than his small real estate empire could ever have achieved. And that's a form of justice that no court could ever have provided. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.